Hey guys, John Polemy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, August 26th, and this is the weekly market update. A reminder, the disclaimer, anything that you hear or see on this podcast or video is not to be taken as investment advice. I am not a registered financial advisor. I cannot give you individual investment advice. Please do your own due diligence. It's your money. It's your responsibility. Okay, so I think I'm just going to touch on this. I haven't had time to go through all of it, but I think this is pretty important to discuss for many reasons. I've talked about this in the past. I've talked about, global hegemons, the United States, the Atlanticist ruling oligarchy, if you will. A lot of people don't want to even discuss this or even know what I'm talking about. And I have said for a while, and other folks have said for a while, that the global East and South, as they got wealthier, as their economies grew, as they had more stature in the world, they were going to begin bucking the U.S. and the G7, the so-called rules-based order, which seems to be, whatever the U.S. and its vassals decide is in the best interest of the U.S. and its vassals. So that's really what I think this is about long term. People don't want to be under the thumb of the United States. I'm not going to get into all the history of all the things that have went on. You can either choose to agree, not agree, partially agree. This is my view. I'm putting it out there. And so what we saw at the summit for the BRICS is an expansion of 6 more countries. And again, before I talk about this, I'm reporting this. I have no idea if this will be beneficial for these countries, if it'll be beneficial for the world, if this could be worse than a U.S. hegemon. I have no idea. No one can possibly know. What I can tell you is that this is going to have repercussions, okay, as this continues, because this is a trend now that's going to continue over the years, okay? We're not going to have the demise of the dollar this year or next year, but over time, what you're seeing is now a challenge to the global hegemon, okay? Because these countries are combining themselves or aligning themselves in their own self-interest. Again, people, if you want to know why people do what they do, you need to try to understand what their own self-interest is. Most people are not Christ-like and altruistic. They pursue their own self-interests. Individuals typically do, countries do. This is just human nature throughout history, okay? And so if you want to understand why somebody's doing something, unless they're psychologically damaged, and so, you have to try to understand why they're doing, how they're going to benefit, and what they perceive as their self-interest. And then you'll have a better insight into why they're doing what they're doing. And so, the new countries that entered now are Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, Argentina, Iran, and Ethiopia. People say, well, big deal. Who cares about these countries? Well, it's interesting. If you look at what I've talked about before, the global island, if you will, the Mackinder doctrine, these green countries are the BRICS countries now. You're starting to see things fill up here. Okay, and I've said this before, I don't want to get too far into this. I considered doing a video about this, but it's pretty complicated. I don't know, it's not, the best. And basically what it is, whoever controls this part of the world controls the world, the populations, the natural resources. And you could see, I think you can have a better understanding of why the policymakers in the U.S. and the Atlanticists here do what they are doing around the world. You could see one of the things I think that came out of this BRICS conference that I thought was very important that got overlooked, especially just, a lot of surface people talking about gold-backed currencies and all this stuff. I mean, this is years down the line. But what I thought was important is one of the things they talked about was the global transportation and ways to change transportation to avoid choke points like the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Straits of Malacca. okay, and opening up transportation corridors on this landmass to help not allow the uh, you know competitors to close off trade at these choke points. So I think that's worth reviewing. I'm not going to do it in this video, but I'm going to link to an article. You may not like the author. It's on Sputnik's website. Pepe Escobar, he has an interesting view on this, as do others. You can read the Western view of this, which is basically, just scoffing at it. It's not a big deal. But what I'm trying to say is that, I believe, and I have said, that the Western countries, the G7, if you will, are in terminal decline for many reasons. Debt being demographics and things like this. So, and just outdated and tired leadership, ineffective leadership, incompetent leadership, and not adjusting to the global realities of what are happening as the countries where the 4.5 to 5 billion people in this area, as they emerge wealthier and enter the world stage, want a bigger input into the say of what goes on, and we're ignoring that. I follow the I'm not an isolationist, but I was a big advocate for Ron Paul, who was also had views. We need to engage with the world in mutual beneficial outcomes, not go around the world and impose our will for whatever's best for us that particular week. That's the rules-based order, and people are tired of it. People are not going to operate under it any longer, and this is a manifestation of that. Now, we can either fight this trend, and it's not working. You see, for example, what's happening in Niger, and the importance of that country here in Africa that most people don't even know about, and the uranium that comes out of there, and the fact that this kind of opened people's eyes to the legacy French colonialism and the exploitation of these places. That's elite, and now these people are thrown off the yoke, and you're seeing countries like Russia and these other countries, supporting, maybe not implicitly, but in the background, this throwing off of the colonial yoke. And then this is what you're seeing all over the place. You had Victoria Nuland show up over there and have some kind of meeting, and she was kind of, brushed off. And so, as you see events transpire, are they going to be able to get their vassals here, Nigeria and some of these other ones, to invade there and change the government? These are things you need to watch, because how many wins and losses are we going to have in foreign policy here? You're starting to see things, and we don't really have a foreign policy, I think, that's makes any sense. So don't want to go too far down that. Just wanted to bring this up. You can see this is going to fill in with more green as we go forward. They'll have another summit in Kazan, Russia next year. It'll be hosted, and I expect several other countries. As a matter of fact, they let 6 countries in, but they originally were talking about China wanted to have 11 admitted, but the Indians pushed back. And so Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, negotiated a compromise where India wanted to let 3 in, or Chinese were pushing for 10 or 11, I think, and then it was negotiated for these 6. But let's talk about just some stats here, I think, that are important that you need to consider, and why, is this actionable today or next week? No, but this is what you need to keep in mind, because this is what's happening here. When you talk about natural resources, shipping lanes, all these things, as this things start to develop, and what's that do to the U.S.? What's going to be the U.S.'s reaction and its vassals in the G7? So it says the BRICS group, the new one now represents 37% of the world's GDP in purchasing power parity terms. The G7 has 29%. So you already have these BRICS countries exceeding the G7. And the G7's representation of world global purchasing power parity term, or global GDP, has been shrinking since 1992. That's an argument I've been making. Okay. And that you have to adjust yourself to that new reality. And we're not doing that. We're clinging to an old, outdated view on foreign policy and economic policy that does not exist and is is changing beneath our feet. And the problem is we have 70, 80-year-old leaders that are clinging to a post-Cold War view of the world that is changing rapidly. It says if all prospective members join in the future, it'll be 45%, talking about the BRICS. This is what's I think is very important and needs to be thought about. The BRICS countries, with its, if you assume the energy endowed countries of Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, now controls 54% of the world's oil production and 46% of the world's population. You should throw Brazil in there also. It's a fairly large oil producer. That's as important. You know, think about this and add it to your homework to think about. This rapprochement that you've seen that's been negotiated between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who were blood enemies for decades, part of the reason why the United States was able to go there, Kissinger to go to Saudi Arabia in the early 70s and negotiate the petrodollar scheme, where the Saudis, in exchange for U.S. protection, military protection, an umbrella of protection against particularly Iran and the Persians, said that they would supply oil at a relatively good price and take their surplus dollars, i.e. petrodollars, and recycle them into U.S. Treasury securities. Okay, that's over with now. We have a rapprochement between two blood enemies. This is important. You know, I am not saying that I'm super bullish on this BRICS things. You have a lot of countries that have a lot of autocrats that have a lot of different views that doesn't necessarily lend itself to cooperation. But again, will self-interest be sufficient to overcome some of these other disagreements they might have? So this has to be watched, because this is going to be very important. Again, it's not actionable for Monday morning when trading opens, but it's something that I think that you have to incorporate into your thinking going forward. I'm certainly doing that. Going on here, the BRICS countries will account for 48.5 million square kilometers, or 36% of the world's landmass, with BRICS 11 possibly including Venezuela, Algeria, and Kazakhstan. That would be next year possibly, as new members as early as 2024. The BRICS may control 90% of all oil and gas traded globally. If you don't think that that's a big deal, then you're not paying attention. Okay. And so I think that we need to have a complete readjustment of our foreign policy, our global economic policy. We can't run around the world and enforce with gunboat diplomacy like we could, you know, over the previous decades. These countries are now too big. You've seen what's happened, for example, in the war in Ukraine. The collective West has been unable, through its proxy, Ukraine, to break Russia economically, militarily, politically. Okay. And so what are you going to do? You're going to start a war with China next year or the year after? Why not say, this is our place in the world. Here's our advantages, the United States. Here's how we're going to trade and negotiate with people for beneficial outcomes, as a foreign policy and economic policy. Because running around the world, threatening people with carrier battle groups isn't going to work. If you haven't figured that out yet, of supersonic missiles and all these new technologies that have come to the battlefield that you're witnessing on a daily basis in that war, then you're not paying attention. Do you not think that China, Iran, Russia are not sharing technology, sharing what works, doctrines that work, don't work? I mean, this drone technology is completely outdated, you know, or at least put at risk combined arms, you know, land maneuver doctrine. Okay, so there's a lot of things changing. Like I said, this is a major situation. You know, if you're in a situation where the BRICS countries control 90% of all oil and gas traded globally, they control the world. I mean, oil and gas is not going away anytime soon, folks. And, you know, the United States is not energy independent, as people think has been promulgated. Okay. We still import a tremendous amount of oil. Our shale revolution is now peaking. And so we're going to have to get with the program here And as we sit back and ignore these things or scoff at them or try to bully these countries, we've forced this. We forced these countries into this. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is going to be a success, that it's going to be better for the people in those countries. I have absolutely no idea. Either does anybody else. But I certainly think it's worth considering and keeping your finger on the pulse and incorporating it, what's going on in the world. Because again, with the debt that the United States has, with the ineffective, outdated, geriatric leadership, no new ideas, just running the old playbook to cream off as much of the wealth of the United States, to strip mine the working and middle class in any way they can for the donor class and the technocratic class. That's not going to work going forward. And that's my view. Again, it's not particularly actionable on a trade next week, but I think it will be over time. Certainly, as I've pointed out, I think that there's tremendous opportunity around the world and more opportunities are going to open up. I certainly don't think at this point in the history and with the valuations of the U.S. that you can have home country bias and have the majority of your investments in the United States. That's just dumb at this point. So on to our, weekly push, showing statistics that we find relevant, as I still think that the bottom's going to drop out of this economy. I'm now convinced now that based on what I've seen and how things are shaping up, that we are heading for a hard landing. I'm not sure it's going to be a great financial crisis, but I think there's just too much complacency and things are not, for example, you just had the announcement on Friday, Rite Aid, which is a major drugstore, that's going out of business now. You see here to the right, you see all the bankruptcies by year, U.S. bankruptcy filings, and then you see, this is through end of July, you're on par to be one of the highest years of bankruptcies. And I think things are going to accelerate as the lag effects of tightening liquidity continue to work their way through the economy. We haven't seen all of the previous rate hikes and the tightening and the ongoing quantitative tightening, the ongoing higher standards, banks pulling back from creating new credit. We have not seen the full effect of that yet. And as that continue, think of it as a python that continues to constrict its victim. It takes time, and slowly but surely, the constriction gets to the point where every time you take a breath and you exhale, the python tightens. So the next time you try to take a breath, you can't expand your lungs, only so much. And then slowly but surely, you are constricted to the point where your diaphragm isn't able to work any longer and get air out, and then you suffocate. And that's kind of how I guess would be maybe not a crude metaphor, but or an analogy, but I think it's appropriate because that's the United States being a debt-based consumer economy with over-indebted, it needs continuous new credit creation. It needs, low interest rates to function because the over-indebted, you're seeing what's happening, for example, with the federal government's interest payments now exploding higher because as the debt's refinanced, you're refinancing from lower interest rates to higher interest rates. And we've talked about this before. So I expect this number to increase. I don't know if we make a new record like the pandemic or the back in the great financial crisis, but this is not positive. This is not indicative of an economy that is hitting on all cylinders. That's healthy. So here's a chart. This is from Bank of America Global Research. Global stocks massively underperforming U.S. tech stocks, U.S. first global equities relative price performance. And you have two things they show here: the internet bubble, which I think a lot of you younger guys probably weren't even around then or were kids then, and the Nifty 50 bubble, which you should go back and read about in the late 60s, early 70s. It's interesting if you go back and read books about this or read what was going on here and here. It's no different than there's nothing new under the sun, folks. The human nature is the same. FOMO, greed, these rationalizations of over valuation, they're always justified. And so now we're seeing the greatest overvaluation. And so one of my key tenets is I sell overvaluation and buy undervaluation. GMO, Jeremy Grantham's shop, you can sign up for they do their monthly forecasted 7-year ahead forecasted yields or returns. And because of this overvaluation, U.S. equities are projected over the next 7 years to give you negative returns annualized. And so where's the value at? Emerging markets and frontier markets. And the average U.S. investor is just not set up for that. But that's what I've been talking about in the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter. We go all over the world. We're not scared to look for opportunities in other areas of the world, and that's where the undervaluation is, folks. We've been talking about, we're watching what's going on in Argentina with the political situation there that could be turning. Okay, it's looking horrible there right now, economic wise. Looting going on, stealing. People are desperate. And so you saw just in the primary that they just had a couple weeks ago, the Libertarian candidate came out on top. You can call it a protest vote, wherever. People are desperate. Okay, they don't want the old, Peronist way of doing things. We talk about that. Is that an opportunity? How does things shake out politically? If things are perceived to go from terrible to less terrible, how much of a change in valuation? That's a metric that we use. We've been talking about, a lot of the central banks in South America or even in Mexico. These are not banana republics like some people perceive all of them. They're legitimate, countries there, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, the reshoring that's happened in Mexico because of the what happened during the pandemic and what's happening with manufacturing, people wanting to move out of China. And so these countries were at the forefront of raising rates during the inflationary cycle we just had, and they're now beginning to cut rates. Okay, so you have to, if you want to be successful in this, you can go buy NVIDIA and you can buy, all of these 7 or 8, 10 overvalued stocks that are driving the majority of the indexes here in the US, or you can go and say, look, with this kind of overvaluation, your forward returns are more than likely, the probabilities are you're going to be below, you're going to have poor returns. And so you need to go look and say what's undervalued. And doesn't take much effort to do that or to allocate capital to those places. With the internet, with the ubiquity of trading platforms that allow you to go anywhere in the world, even via ETFs, if you're inclined, there's always a way, there's always something happening somewhere else. So that's kind of what we're talking about in the newsletter. We don't just focus on buying what everybody else is buying, whatever's hyped up. Okay. And yeah, this is pattern recognition. These were two of the biggest bubbles over the last 50, 60, 70 years, and you see where we're at now. Do you think that we move higher from here? Would you be inclined to buy this chart or sell it? You saw what happened before. Okay. These things revalue down, the overvaluation gets wrung out. And I think if you go and look at a chart of like emerging markets or foreign stocks, mostly emerging markets, and look at what's happening in the US when it's overvalued, these things tend to flip, and they usually go in like multi-year cycles. And I think we're at the cusp of that, and I think you should at least consider it. Talked about this before, I talk about things that I'm doing, but we're just sitting on cash. Be patient. Okay, people are writing me like, I don't see anything that has, like in the newsletter, we're looking for moonshots. We're looking for extreme undervaluation, situations that are blown up that can turn and give us 3, 5, 10 baggers. Okay, I don't see anything on the horizon right now. We're dabbling here and there, but we're still holding our initial positions in uranium. Okay, offshore oil services, okay, is a big component. because a lot, and even in those sectors, we've already had pretty substantial moves, folks. So I have a lot of new people coming on board. You're not going to get 10 baggers from here in some of these stocks. I was talking to a colleague, a friend, if you will, who joined my newsletter, and I had been advising him over the last couple of years. We had conversations, and he was able to take some positions in these. He reminded me where he like bought some positions in some of these oil field services stocks that we were talking about, a couple of years ago. And I remembered, he's up 5 or 10 times, or five, 3, 4, 5 times on these things. And we were just talking the other day. He's like, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, just hold what you got because the cycle's not nearly over." I'll put a link to a interview that was on Value Hive. I'll put it in the show notes, but it was an excellent interview with the CEO of Subsea 7. I think if you're interested in offshore and how the cycle works and what this cycle is looking like, it's a pretty good interview. But if you're coming in now, I mean, you're not going to get 10 baggers in your, more than likely in some of these things from these levels. There's still upside to capture, but we're still, I'm out there looking for the next 10 baggers. Okay. And what can we redeploy in that's going to give us outsized returns? And again, I'm drawn to a lot of emerging and frontier markets just because I think that they've been undervalued for so long, and the emphasis has been on the US and the tech sector, but I think that's getting ready to change. So there's nothing wrong with, again, collecting 5% plus in money market funds or T-bills and waiting for that fat pitch, having that patience. Okay. I've talked about high yield debt when it finally blows up, which I'm anticipating it will, based on previous cycles, which I'm going to show a chart about that from Crescat Capital. That will be the biggest, these credit cycles, when they blow up about every 10 years or so, they just represent tremendous risk reward potential. And so sitting around, if your average return over the years just by buying the S&P 500 or just buying the stock market overall is 8 to 9%, and you can get 5.5, you're capturing 2/3 of the long-term return you could expect in the stock market in risk-free treasury bills. Have patience, accumulate cash, and wait. Okay, the fat pitches will come, and then there will be layups. I mean, you only need to do 3 or 4 of these, maybe 3 times, do 10 baggers in your investing career, especially you young guys, and you will be extremely wealthy. Okay. And starting with a small sum of money. But if you try to trade in and out, if you try to get anxious, that's the thing. That's what Wall Street has set it up to treat it like a video game so you can get those dopamine releases by, day trading or, absorbing all this information and say, well, that sounds like a good at jumping around like a frog on a lily pads in a pond. No, let's wait for the fat pitches. They will come, like oilfield services 2 years ago, like uranium 3 or 4 years ago, and you just sit and wait. Okay. And then when that fat pitch comes, we swing for the fence. So yes, there's still upside in those sectors, but don't be deluded into the idea that, everybody, like I've said a couple weeks ago, everybody and his brother now is talking about offshore oil field services. So a lot of money's coming in, has a lot of attention. So the stocks are being revalued. Okay, they've already moved tremendously. Yes, they're good, more than likely the cycle's not over, 3 to 5 year cycle. But eventually, enough capital will come in. If the returns are high enough, people will come into this market. People will begin expanding, and the margins will then decrease. And we're not seeing that yet, but that's an example. And so we need to wait. If you have new money, yes, you can take a taste here and there, but make sure you adjust your expectations. So this is Jeremy Grantham. Again, I follow his GMO research. It's pretty good. When I was talking about those different markets that are beginning to cut rates now, that were on the forefront of raising rates during this previous inflation cycle, they're now cutting rates. Some of the South American countries, the Republic of Georgia, some of these places that I follow, I follow a lot, I think that the interest rate cycle has begun to turn, and it won't. The developed countries eventually will cut rates. I don't know when, but these other countries are already beginning to cut rates. And so, what does he say here? It says, in the end, life is simple. Low rates push up asset prices. High rates push asset prices down. We are now in an era that will average higher rates than we had in the last 10 years, talking about, the US in particular. And so this is another reason why I think that you need to expand your repertoire, or expand your views outside your home country. Don't just have home country bias, which is particularly a characteristic of American investors. I mean, I'm not able to get this article, but it says that Jeremy Grantham says that Fed is kidding itself on avoiding a recession. So it says the slow-moving influence of rising interest rates will end up torpedoing the economy, dashing Federal Reserve expectations that a recession can be avoided. We're not going to avoid a recession. It's not going to be a soft landing. That's not what's going to happen. The Fed thinks that they've got this under control. They've been wrong forever. You can go back and look at all their calls. They've gotten things wrong consistently. They're going to get this wrong too. And so eventually they'll be forced into a rate cutting cycle. We don't know what landmine is going to go off next. Commercial real estate, high yield bonds. We don't know. We saw in a previous slide, again, bankruptcies are increasing. Eventually you get to a point where that starts affecting the financial industry, the banks. So we'll just have to see. And again, what's wrong with sitting in T-bills and accumulating cash and, waiting for that, that home run pitch. This is the chart I was talking about, probability of recession versus junk bond credit spreads. You see the New York Fed probability of recession in U.S. 12 months ahead. It's at the highest it's ever been in about 40 years. We're guaranteed we're going to have a recession. It's going to happen. But what you see in previous cycles where this indicator was indicating probabilities of recessions, you see that the folks at Crescat Capital kind of labeled this, right? S&L crisis, tech bust, great financial crisis, repo crisis. And you see as the probability of recession increases, junk bond yields blow out. But that hasn't happened yet. And so it kind of goes back to that old Sesame Street skit, right? Which one of these is not like the others? Well, the current situation, the complacency here, and maybe it's different this time, but in the past, it hasn't been different. Again, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances where this probability of recession indicator has blown out, and high yield junk follows, with a lag as you enter these recessions, because what happens? Now, the argument's made, well, a lot of these companies refinance at lower rates, so they won't be affected. Again, I go back to the bankruptcy data and the fact that, as the economy goes into recession, cash flows are going to be constricted. Again, we don't know the magnitude, but I find it very difficult to believe that with this outlier relative to these other times where the probability of recession blew out. And again, you can say, well, that's just something that they pulled up, that they got this correlation. Okay, well, ignore it at your peril if you could choose to ignore it, but I'm just pointing this out. And so it has a fairly good track record of when probability of recession goes up means you end up in a recession. Again, tech bust, great financial crisis. You saw what happened. This is a perfect example of the opportunity. You had, this shows the U.S. corporate high yield, less 10-year treasury yield. You were close to 20%. I mean, a lot of people became very wealthy buying bonds at the top. Warren Buffett actually bought a bunch of corporate high yield at this juncture. He provided a lot of liquidity. He was able to work out these different preferred share deals with the banks, warrants, other things, and made a tremendous amount of money. So if we do get a blowout in high yield debt, you will have a tremendous opportunity on a risk-adjusted basis to make a tremendous amount of money. But we haven't seen it to this point. Jesse Felder, again, sign up for his weekly emails. He sends out a lot of good charts. I just wanted to remind you, this is, this travels around the internet, this particular relative chart, real assets versus financial assets. We're at the, lowest point of commodities being cheap relative to equities. And it looks like it's starting to turn. This has been, again, is constantly on the internet. I just want to remind folks where we're at relative to that. Doesn't mean it's a straight line up. It doesn't mean it's a layup, but I just want to point this out, that this is we're at the lowest valuation of commodities or real asset prices relative to financial assets, basically in the last 100 years. Again, sell overvaluation and buy undervaluation. I wanted to point this out. I'll put a link to this. I thought this was like a 2-hour interview. They took a summer break. This is Eric Townsend's site, MacroVoices, and they had this guy Matt Barry on, and it was a 2-hour discussion about artificial intelligence, something I don't know a lot about. When I listen to this, I'm going to listen to it again. I have a plane trip tomorrow. I'm for some vacation I'm taking. I am going to listen to this probably a couple more times. There was so much tremendous information. This Matt Barry guy seems to be pretty switched on, but just some of how quickly that AI is advancing, and just one vignette that I remember from the discussion. The captchas that you have, and that you have to like find how many bikes are in the picture or whatever, that's designed to keep like robots and stuff like that, or AI from being able to access the site. And the guy told the story about, I don't know exactly, I'm probably telling it a little bit wrong, but this is how I heard it. So there was some site that the AI was trying to get on, and it couldn't get on it because it didn't have enough, hadn't learned, the visualizations. It couldn't do it. And so the AI then went out and like tried to hire a freelancer, to go click the box, the captcha box, that wasn't a robot, to give the AI access to this particular site. I mean, there was another situation where in a military exercise, the AI was controlling these drones that attack the enemy targets, and it would be given points. And so the AI was incentivized to destroy as many of the enemy targets as possible, but it wanted the human operator had override control on the AI and could tell it not to attack, or it had to get final permission from the operator. So the AI determined on its own that it didn't like this rule because the human being was inhibiting its ability to get points. It was told to get points. That's how it wins. And so the AI then attempted to attack the human operator wherever it was located. This is, I think, a simulation. It wasn't like an actual drone, but they were running these exercises like they do. And the AI just decided on its own, well, you're keeping me from doing what I was asked to do, which is accumulate points, and I get points by destroying these targets, and you're overriding me from doing that, so I'm going to take you out. I don't think, they talked about another situation with how advanced the illustrative capabilities are, how the ability of this thing to score high in all these tests. Basically, what I took away from this is there's going to be tremendous dislocation of like redundant work or thing. And it's going to be able to do it better and cheaper. And you're going to have like, all of they talked about, for example, when you have documents drawn up by a law firm and how you get charged billable hours and all these little fees, that, instead you just be able to hire a paralegal for 45 grand a year or something, be able to knows how to operate ChatGPT, and this thing will just, bust out the documents for you. You don't have, I mean, it's going to crush, people that look at MRIs, like radiologists that look at x-rays and try to find cancers or anomalies or whatever. The AI is going to be able to do it better and cheaper. And so there's going to be a lot of, I guess the point of this is I didn't realize how fast this was moving, and you could sit down, you can't even envision all of the dislocations that are going to take place going forward. And so what does that mean economically, socially, politically, as millions and millions of people don't even understand the tsunami of dislocation that's coming to their livelihood. This is another reason why I've told people all along, you have to own assets. You've got to get a grub stake together. This world is changing so quickly under your feet, and you can't, the human mind, the other thing that this Matt Berry said is the human mind is going to get to the point now where it won't even be able to keep up and conceive of all the changes. You're going to have the AI writing new versions of AI, and it's just going to become exponential. And so this obviously has a chance to get way out of control. It has potential, obviously unknown and unlimited benefits, but you're not going to be able to turn it off. Once something like this gets going, it's beyond capable of turning it off. So we get into a HAL situation like in, 2001: A Space Odyssey, where HAL, basically takes over. Um, if you see all the movie, you know what I'm talking about. They were going to unplug him, and then he was able to lip read and bust out the scientists. So, I mean, again, I think it's worth listening to. I think it's worth, I'm going to spend a lot more time learning about this, because not necessarily for my own business, but I think you need to really understand, because this is going to just like hit these already the economies in the West that are going to be seeing disinflation, deflation, demographics issues, middle class is eroded, working classes are being eroded. And this is just going to totally dump on them too. And now this is going to seep into the white collar. And so this is going to have to be dealt with. I think this is maybe another reason why you see some of the worldwide organizations trying to take ultimate control, because I think they're not. This is going to get ugly, possibly society-wise, when people don't have an ability to do anything because the AI is doing everything. I mean, everybody can't be out digging ditches or being a farm worker. They're going to automate everything if they can. So this bears watching and understanding. And again, you have to be an asset owner so you can take advantage of it. If you don't own anything, you're just going to be subject to whatever scraps are given to you. I mean, you could sit here for hours contemplating positive, pros and cons to this. And there's going to be not probably a lot of winners and a whole bunch of losers. And I don't want to be a loser, and I don't want you to be a loser either. So it's worth, getting hot and getting activated and trying to figure out what's really going on. Okay, so I am going to now switch to some political commentary. If you don't enjoy that or dislike my views on that, you should shut off the video now or podcast. I'm showing you a video of the mugshot of Donald J. Trump. Something's happening out there. I found it fascinating this last week when they had this Republican candidate debate, whatever, and then Tucker Carlson on Twitter interviewed Donald J. Trump. And I found it fascinating, just some different groups and people that I talked to throughout, all stratas. And a lot of the discussion, some folks were saying, well, I mean, basically Tucker and Trump blew away. I mean, nobody cares what Chris Christie or Nikki Haley has to say about anything. They're not going to get the nomination. This is the guy that's going to be the Republican nominee, okay? The anger, the frustration that's happening, I found it fascinating interviewing some African Americans down in Georgia that showed up. They're, and various rappers I saw on Twitter, people are identifying with this guy now because of the perception of the over-the-top persecution, which many people in minority communities perceive that they have been subjected to. Okay. And we're seeing, again, with the inflation that we've had, inflation's cumulative. The prices go up, they don't come back down. And I've seen video after video. Of course, it's all anecdotal. People getting on the internet saying, how am I supposed to survive? I'm working 3 jobs. I can't make it. There's a tremendous anger and frustration building. And I think that, again, the old worn out playbook being run by the elites the geriatrics running the government or running these institutions, they're not picking up on this vibe. Okay. And something's happening here. And do I think that this guy has any? I don't think anything will change if this guy gets elected. Okay, you're not going to vote your way out of this, but I do find it fascinating, especially with a lot of people that are, Republican people, and they're like parsing. Well, I mean, the views that this thing had blew out. So everybody was like, "Well, it's not really that many views because you have to know how they're counting." This is all irrelevant. I mean, this guy got interviewed by Tucker for an hour and said absolutely nothing. Okay, except the same old tropes about how he's being attacked and all this stuff, which I don't disagree with. The one thing that I pulled out of this interview that him and Tucker had, and Tucker softballed him. Let's just be honest. They blew up the internet with this thing. Again, just totally great call in my view. Just totally discount the rest of those pygmies in the so-called Republican Party. Asa Hutchinson, who cares? Who is he? Does anybody know who this person? Who cares? Nikki Haley, I thought it funny. They had a meme that showed Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever, two people of Indian heritage, Hindus, arguing about how much money we should give to, how much taxpayer money should be given to Israel. I mean, somebody made a meme about that. Nobody cares about any of that anymore. Okay, people are struggling. The majority of people are struggling. 60% of the people in this country are living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. And now we have AI coming right at them with a target on their back, and they don't even know what's getting ready to happen. And there's a frustration out there. There's anger out there. People can't put their finger on it, but they are swinging their guns towards the elites and saying, you got us into this, you did this. And this is the only, if you don't allow the election, if you don't allow fair, if you don't let an outlet for the anger, it's going to manifest in other ways that people, if the powers that be thought January 6th was an actual insurrection, they haven't seen an insurrection. Watch the videos when the people in Sri Lanka got so frustrated, they stormed the government buildings, and the people in the government had to run for their lives. They burned down all the elites' houses and businesses. Okay, that's an insurrection. Okay, violence. Okay, if we don't allow people to have an outlet, if we don't come up with real policies to address the 120 million people that are in the middle and working classes in this country, whatever the number is, a significant, call them the deplorables, flyover country, then there's going to be a problem here. Okay, it's going to manifest in ways that people aren't prepared for, and it's not going to be fixed by Asa Hutchinson or Chris Christie or Nikki Haley. I mean, Mr. Trump can't fix it, but he is. People are projecting onto him because of this outlaw persona now that he is now getting. That he's, whatever you might think of him personally, whatever you think about his policies, whatever, that it's more important now just the fact that he's the only person that at least says that he cares about me. And that is going to be enough, I think. So I think this is worth watching. I mean, this is the best meme I ever saw. I mean, this guy's a master showman. I'm not going to say he knows anything about economic policy, foreign policy, what have you. Did he make all kinds of mistakes in personnel selections and all this stuff? Yes, 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 and yes. But this guy knows media. He knows television. He knows how to create a narrative and a perception. Okay. He had the best rated show for 10 years, I think. One of the top rated shows. This guy knows how to do this. This is the biggest free advertising you could ever, even if they're successful putting him in a jail cell, he'll still be elected. Okay, that's my view. So I don't know what they're going, how things are going to end up but something's happening out there. And I think he's going to get a record amount of African American votes, minority type votes. People are starting to identify with this now. They're just throwing everything at them because people in some of these communities know people like that. Whether it's true or not, that's the perception that people have. Okay, perception is reality. Again, I don't think if he gets elected, anything's going to change. We're on a collision course with I've said it before, within a generation, the United States is going to dissolve as a political entity. I'm hoping it'll be not that violent, but more than likely it'll be very violent. It's just not sustainable. And we have issues, and we do have that are not going to be able to be fixed with the current political situation, and the current political situation will not be sufficient to fix the problems. So I think this bears watching. Again, a lot of people are I think going to come around to this just because of the anger that's out there. And I don't think that the elites and the technocrats and the masters of the universe get it. Okay. And you're already seeing it in Europe now. You're seeing a shift to the right. You're seeing in Germany, for example, AfD being the, if not the largest party, getting close to it. And so exactly what does the entrenched elite say? Well, they're talking about, banning the party. That's democracy, right? Again, that's your rules-based order. That's your democracy in action. These people are not going to let go of power voluntarily. And so I'm not going to speak more to it. I mean, you can look throughout history to see what real change has happened. It wasn't by voting. I'll just leave it at that. You can go back through history and see how real changes were made in various countries. Nobody voted their way out of it. So and you're not going to vote your way out of this. But I find this interesting. It's worth watching. The one relevant question I'll finish up with that I did take from the Tucker interview with Donald J. Trump was, they've thrown everything at you. You're still going. Aren't you worried about, ultimately the one thing that they could try to take you out? And that's, bumping you off. And I thought that was an important question because don't put it past them. Don't put it past them. We've killed presidents in this country before. We've killed U.S. senators before. We've taken out people for various reasons. And so that would be, if that something like that were to happen, I think the country would explode. But we'll see. Again, I can't tell the future. I just think that, I mean, just this mugshot here is like a perfect representation of how this guy rolls, and I have to give him credit for that. Again, I don't think he knows anything about foreign policy or economics or anything like that. I don't think that he'll govern if he gets elected, any different than he did before. It'll be the seat of the pants and a lot of turmoil and nonsense. But I think people are completely fed up with the status quo, completely fed up. There is zero interest in this country to having Joe Biden continue stammering his way. And then, who are they really going to run? Because I just do not see Mr. Biden making it. He's in bad condition mentally, and well, we'll see. So I find it interesting. Again, I make no predictions. Who knows what will happen? We're in. You got to keep your finger on the pulse. There's so many, like I said, shifting plates under us. You got to keep your footing, and so we'll try to do that and look at the information and try to look at probabilities and forecast the best we can. Okay, guys, that's it for this week. Appreciate the support. Again, the podcast now is, I know there's a lot of people at one time. I think we had several hundred people listening to the podcast. I've got it up on Podbean. It should be going out to Spotify. I'll check it this week. I uploaded it last week. I think it takes a day or two. There's a lag for all the whatever happens in the interwebs and all that, in the computers to get you that. If not, I'll try to fix that. We're trying to get it on Apple Podcasts, so we'll continue to try to do that as best we can. Again, do not forget, if you are interested in subscribing to the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter, it's $150 a year. The price is going to $179 on September 1st. Explained why. So if you lock in the $150 price, you'll be grandfathered. If you continue on as a subscriber, you'll always have that $150 price, just like the founding members who got on board many years ago with me are at the founders at the $79 a month. So that doesn't change. You're going to be grandfathered in. Take advantage of that if you're so inclined. Thank you for your support, and we'll talk to you next week.